The volcanic soil of the Luzon ridge crumbled between Corporal Takeshi Yamamoto's fingers as he tested its density. Dawn painted the valley below in shades of amber and grey, the light catching on morning mist that clung to the American positions like a shroud. He pressed the dirt back into place along the foxhole's forward edge, satisfied with the camouflage netting his men had strung overhead. Around him, the sounds of preparation filled the February morning, entrenching tools biting into earth, nervous jokes exchanged in whispers, the metallic click of rifle bolts being checked and rechecked. Yamamoto-san, Private First Class Kenji Sato, called softly from the Type 92 heavy machine gun position to his left. The young man's face still held traces of the enthusiasm that had carried him through basic training 6 months ago. The ammunition belts are loaded. 1,200 rounds, as Tanaka-san specified. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Yamamoto nodded, watching as Sato ran his hand along the machine gun's barrel with something approaching reverence. The Type 92 was a beautiful weapon, precision-engineered, reliable, designed for the economical fire discipline that Japanese doctrine demanded. He remembered his own training, the instructors explaining how each round must count, how Japanese warrior spirit, combined with technical superiority, would overcome any enemy's crude reliance on volume. "Good," Yamamoto said, moving to inspect the position. The gun commanded a clear field of fire down the ridge's western approach, interlocking with the positions to their right and left. Remember what Warrant Officer Ito taught us. Short, controlled bursts. Make every round matter. Sato's grin widened. The Americans will break themselves against our positions. Their machine guns are wasteful, inaccurate. They spray bullets like water from a hose. He spoke with the certainty of propaganda, words he'd heard so often they'd calcified into truth. Movement along the trench line drew Yamamoto's attention. Sergeant Major Hiroshi Tanaka moved with the careful economy of a man who'd spent 8 years at war, his frame lean to the point of gauntness. The veteran's face bore the weathered creases of campaigns across China and the Pacific, eyes that had witnessed Japanese victory at its zenith and now watched its slow erosion. He paused at each position, speaking quietly with the men, his presence lending weight to the morning's preparations. When Tanaka reached Yamamoto's foxhole, he crouched low, bringing his face level with the younger man's. "The lieutenant is making his rounds," he said, voice barely above a murmur. "He'll speak of Bushido and the superiority of Japanese night tactics. Let the men hear what they need to hear." A pause, weighted with meaning. "But you and I know the truth about our ammunition situation." Yamamoto felt his stomach tighten. 1,200 rounds per gun, barely enough for sustained engagement, Tanaka confirmed. "I've fought since 37, watched our supply lines stretch thinner with each passing year. The Americans!" He gestured toward the valley where enemy campfires glowed openly, carelessly in the morning dimness. "They light fires as if they have no fear of being seen. That kind of confidence comes from abundance we can't match. We hold the high ground," Yamamoto offered, hearing the uncertainty in his own voice. "Our defensive positions are well sighted. The doctrine was written when we had ammunition to spare," Tanaka interrupted gently. "Fire discipline is wisdom when you're rich, desperation when you're poor. Remember that when the shooting starts." He clapped Yamamoto's shoulder once, then continued down the line. The sun climbed higher, burning away the mist. Yamamoto watched his squad complete their preparations with practiced efficiency. Private Taro Watanabe, the replacement who'd arrived just 3 days ago, struggled to string camouflage netting with hands that trembled slightly. The boy, he couldn't have been more than 18, had received 3 weeks of training before being shipped to the front. A far cry from the year of instruction veterans like Tanaka had undergone earlier in the war. Yamamoto moved to help him, his teaching instinct surfacing despite the uniform he wore. "Here," he said, demonstrating the proper knot. "Pull it tight, but leave slack for the wind. Too rigid and it'll tear. Too loose and it reveals your position. Watanabe's hands fumbled with the cord. Yamamoto-san, I heard you were a schoolteacher before. In Hiroshima, yes. Mathematics and literature. The memories felt impossibly distant, chalk dust and the sound of children reciting their lessons, a world that might as well have existed on another planet. The principles are the same, though. Attention to detail keeps you alive. The Americans, Watanabe whispered, glancing toward the valley. Are they really as numerous as they say? Before Yamamoto could answer, Lieutenant Yoshio Nakamura's voice rang out across the position. Attention! The officer stood ramrod straight, his uniform immaculate despite the circumstances, hand resting on his family's ancestral sword. At 26, he carried himself with the rigid confidence of Imperial Military Academy training, every gesture embodying the samurai heritage he claimed through blood. The soldiers assembled, standing at attention in their foxholes. Nakamura's gaze swept across them, and Yamamoto saw genuine belief burning in those eyes, faith that would accept no compromise. No doubt, soldiers of the Emperor, Nakamura began, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of countless similar speeches. Today we face the American advance. They come with their machines, their crude reliance on material superiority. But we possess something they cannot understand, Yamato Damashi, the spirit of Japan. Our ancestors' courage flows through our veins. When darkness falls, we will demonstrate the superiority of Japanese night-fighting tactics. The Americans fear the night, fear close combat where their technology cannot save them. Sato stood straighter, drinking in the words. Around the position, Yamamoto saw similar reactions, back straightening, chins lifting, who doubt pushed aside by the comforting certainty of doctrine. Our Type 92 machine guns represent the pinnacle of military engineering, Nakamura continued. Precision instruments wielded by warriors, not the wasteful American guns designed for conscripts who cannot shoot straight. Each of you has been trained in fire discipline, in making every round count. This is our strength. When the Americans come, they will find not mere soldiers, but samurai defending sacred ground. The lieutenant paused, letting his words sink in. The ridge we hold controls the valley. Lose this position, and the entire defensive line collapses. But we will not lose. Through Seishin, fighting spirit, we will prevail. Death before dishonor, victory through will. These are not empty words, but the foundation of Japanese military superiority. As Nakamura moved on to inspect the next position, Yamamoto caught Tanaka's eye. The sergeant's expression remained carefully neutral, but something in his gaze spoke volumes. A weary recognition of rhetoric divorced from reality, of spirit invoked to compensate for material shortage. Corporal Masao Fujita appeared at Yamamoto's foxhole, ledger clutched in hands that showed ink stains and nervous wear. The ammunition supply NCO had spent the morning conducting inventory, and the anxiety radiating from him suggested the results had not been encouraging. Yamamoto-san, I need to record your allocation formally. Type 92, 1,200 rounds. Individual rifles, 30 rounds per man. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Yamamoto watched as Fujita made careful notations, numbers that told a story of scarcity. Is it enough? He asked quietly. Fujita's pen paused. It has to be, he said, but the tremor in his voice suggested he'd already run the mathematics of their situation and found the equation wanting. Captain Matsumoto insists spirit will compensate for material limitations. The lieutenant believes fire discipline will make our limited ammunition sufficient. He looked up, meeting Yamamoto's eyes. I believe in numbers, and the numbers say we're rationing rounds that should be abundant. Before Yamamoto could respond, Fujita moved on, continuing his inventory with the meticulous attention of a man who understood that logistics would determine survival more surely than courage. Warrant Officer Keisuke Ito arrived mid-morning, conducting his final inspection of the Type 92 positions. The weapons specialist moved with the careful precision of his pre-war profession, machinist's hands checking headspace and timing with practiced ease. Soldiers gathered as he worked, drawn by the authority of technical expertise. "Beautiful engineering," Ito murmured, running his fingers along the gun's receiver. The Type 92's design allows for sustained accuracy that American weapons cannot match. Their Browning M1919 sacrifices precision for volume, a crude philosophy reflecting crude thinking. He straightened, addressing the assembled soldiers. "Our gun fires from a closed bolt, improving accuracy. The Americans' open bolt design creates vibration, reducing effectiveness. Mechanically, we are superior." Sato leaned forward eagerly. "Then we have the advantage?" Ito's expression grew complicated. "Mechanically, yes. Tactically—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "Superior engineering assumes sufficient ammunition to demonstrate that superiority. A perfect gun with no bullets is an expensive club." He didn't elaborate, returning to his inspection, but the implication hung in the air like cordite smoke. The day wore on. Men rotated through rest periods, drinking carefully rationed water, eating rice balls that tasted of metal from the cans they'd been stored in. Yamamoto found himself at a makeshift shrine someone had erected, a simple arrangement of stones, with prayers written on scraps of paper tucked between them. He added his own, asking not for victory, but for the wisdom to protect his men when the protection of victory seemed increasingly uncertain. Medical Corpsman Koji. Hashimoto had established his aid station in a reverse-slope cave, arranging his limited supplies with the careful attention of someone who knew they'd have to stretch impossibly far. Yamamoto found him there as afternoon shadows lengthened. The medic bent over a small journal, writing with intense concentration. "Recording treatment protocols?" Yamamoto asked. Hashimoto looked up, and Yamamoto was struck by the intelligence in those eyes, the gaze of someone trained to observe, analyze, understand. "Documenting conditions," Hashimoto said quietly. "Medical history for whatever it's worth. I've been noting the unit's nutritional state. Subclinical scurvy in perhaps 30% of the men. Vitamin deficiencies across the board. We're not starving, but we're not thriving either. Does command know?" "I report." "Whether they listen—" Hashimoto shrugged. "The body is a machine, Yamamoto-san. It requires fuel, maintenance. Send it into battle depleted, and it fails regardless of spirit." He closed the journal carefully. "But I'm just a medical student who couldn't finish his degree before the draft came. What do I know about warfare?" "More than you think," Yamamoto said, watching as Hashimoto organized bandages with hands that had already begun to tremble slightly, the first signs of stress that would only intensify. As sunset approached, Yamamoto took first watch, settling into his foxhole with rifle at hand. The valley below transformed in the fading light, American positions becoming visible as campfires bloomed across their lines. The sight troubled him more than he wanted to admit, that casual revelation of position, the abundance implied by fires that served comfort rather than necessity. Beside him, Sato checked the Type 92 one final time, running through the manual of arms with the devotion of religious ritual. "Tomorrow," the young soldier whispered, "we show them what Japanese soldiers can do." Yamamoto didn't answer immediately. He was thinking of Tanaka's warning, Fujita's calculations, Ito's qualified praise, Hashimoto's clinical observations. He was thinking of 1,200 rounds against an enemy that lit fires to ward off the chill, suggesting supply chains that never stuttered. "Tomorrow," he finally agreed. Though uncertainty gnawed at him like hunger, the night settled over the ridge, bringing with it the weight of anticipation. In the darkness, Yamamoto heard prayers whispered, weapons checked, men shifting in their foxholes as they sought comfort that wouldn't come. Somewhere down the line, someone was quietly weeping, whether from fear or exhaustion. Yamamoto couldn't tell. He stared into the valley where American fires burned bright and careless, and felt the first cold touch of doubt settle into his bones. The doctrine promised victory through spirit and superior tactics. The officers preached Bushido as if it were armor against bullets. But watching those distant fires, Yamamoto found himself wondering if spirit could overcome the grinding mathematics of industrial war, if warrior culture could survive contact with an enemy that possessed not just courage, but abundance so complete they didn't bother to hide their strength. The question hung unanswered as darkness deepened and the first watch passed into second, carrying them all toward whatever dawn would bring. The artillery began before dawn, shattering the pre-morning dark. Yamamoto barely had time to brace before the ridge erupted. The bombardment came with mechanical precision. No probing fire, just methodical destruction walking across their line. Each blast crushed the air from his lungs, filling his mouth with dirt and cordite. For 90 minutes the barrage continued, then lifted as abruptly as it began. Smoke hung thick as fog. 2 machine gun nests were gone. The ridge cratered beyond recognition. Yet most positions survived, damaged but intact. Yamamoto called out. Sato emerged, pale but unhurt, their gun still functional. Then came the new sound, continuous hammering that rolled across the valley. Not artillery, machine guns. American M1919s, firing in endless rotation. Tracer fire stitched through the mist, suppressing every Japanese position. When one Type 92 opened fire in disciplined bursts, 3 Brownings turned and erased it within seconds. They can't sustain that, Sato murmured. But they did. The Americans rotated gunners, fed ammunition belts, never pausing. Suppression itself had become a weapon. Abundance made doctrine. When a runner brought Captain Matsumoto's order to conserve ammunition, Yamamoto understood the implication. Hold fire, endure suppression, and wait to die efficiently. A glance at his watch confirmed the horror. 18 minutes of uninterrupted fire. The Americans showed no strain, only smooth precision, like factory workers assembling destruction. Through the haze, infantry advanced in perfect coordination. Suppress, move, suppress, move. The simplicity was terrifying. Spirit and discipline meant nothing under an avalanche of bullets that never stopped. A neighboring company's banzai charge ended in seconds. 70 men erased by crossfire that didn't even break rhythm. Corporal Fujita crawled over, ledger in hand. "We've fired 30% of our load," he gasped. "They've got trucks, ammunition stacked like they have no limits. One gun has more rounds than our entire sector." The arithmetic of defeat was undeniable. Even without direct hits, men broke down trembling, eyes empty. "Combat exhaustion," the medic said. "Their continuous fire destroys the mind." When the Americans closed to 300 meters and the order to open fire came, Yamamoto lifted his rifle with mechanical obedience. He already knew the truth. This wasn't battle, but revelation. Spirit could not stand against machinery. Abundance itself had become a strategy, and scarcity their faith, their fatal flaw. The sun climbed higher, transforming the ridge into a furnace of heat, smoke, and unrelenting machine gun fire. Yamamoto's world had contracted to the dimensions of his foxhole, 1.5 meters of volcanic soil that represented the only safety in a landscape dominated by violence. He'd stopped trying to count the individual bursts of fire an hour ago. The M1919s had merged into a continuous roar that varied only in intensity, never in presence. "Water," Sato croaked beside him, lips cracked and bleeding. The young soldier's face had aged years in the past 6 hours. Youth burned away by sustained stress that allowed no respite. Yamamoto passed him a canteen, watched him drink with careful rationing born from bitter experience. The temperature in their position had climbed past uncomfortable into dangerous, metal too hot to touch, the air thick with cordite smoke that seared lungs and stung eyes. But standing to seek relief meant exposing oneself to machine gun fire that dominated every centimeter of the ridge. "Why don't they assault?" Sato asked, voice raw. "They're close enough. Why just keep firing?" The question had haunted Yamamoto all morning. The Americans had advanced to within 200 meters of the Japanese positions, then simply stopped. Not because defenders had halted them. Japanese return fire had been sporadic and ineffective, quickly suppressed by concentrated M1919 response. The Americans had stopped because they chose to, establishing firing positions that turned the ridge into a killing ground without risking their own infantry in close assault. They don't need to assault, Yamamoto realized aloud. They're destroying us from distance, and they were. Yamamoto counted 6 distinct M1919 positions visible through the smoke, each firing in carefully coordinated rotation. When one gun paused to change barrels or reload, another picked up the suppression seamlessly. The coordination was mechanical in its precision, crews rotating through assigned sectors, maintaining constant pressure that prevented Japanese soldiers from manning their defensive positions effectively. Movement along the trench line drew his attention. Warrant officer. Ito crawled toward their position with agonizing slowness, pressing himself flat whenever the fire intensified. It took him 10 minutes to cover 30 meters, arriving breathless and bleeding from a dozen minor cuts where rock fragments had found exposed skin. Technical analysis, Ito gasped, sliding into the foxhole's marginal protection. He pulled out a small notebook, pages already stained with soil and sweat. I've been observing their fire patterns. Each M1919 is firing approximately 400-500 rounds per minute in sustained bursts. They rotate crews every 15 minutes to prevent barrel overheating and fatigue. That's impossible, Sato protested weakly. No force can sustain that rate of fire. The ammunition consumption is exactly what I'm calculating, Ito interrupted, his machinist's precision cutting through the chaos. 6 guns, averaging 450 rounds per minute, firing for, he checked his watch, 6 hours and 17 minutes. That's approximately 1,020,000 rounds expended. The number hung in the air, too large to process. Yamamoto tried to contextualize it against Japanese capabilities and came up empty. Their entire defensive sector, comprising 3 companies, had started the battle with perhaps 100,000 rounds total across all weapons. The Americans had expended 10 times that amount in suppressive fire alone. Your mathematics must be wrong, Yamamoto said, though he knew they weren't. Ito's laugh was bitter. I wish they were. But I've watched them resupplied twice now. Trucks drive up in broad daylight, completely unconcerned about Japanese fire because we can't effectively engage them. They unload ammunition crates by the dozen, stack them casually behind firing positions like they're building furniture. He made another notation. This is what American industrial capacity looks like, translated into tactical application. They've built an entire doctrine around ammunition abundance. But the Type 92 is mechanically superior, Sato insisted, clinging to the last refuge of propaganda. Officer training explained the Type 92 is indeed superior in certain specifications, Ito interrupted gently, his technical honesty cutting through ideology. Better accuracy from closed-bolt design, more reliable feeding mechanism, easier to maintain in field conditions. But tactical doctrine isn't about mechanical specifications. It's about integration with industrial capacity and training philosophy. He gestured toward the American positions. Their guns fire from open bolts, sacrificing marginal accuracy for sustained fire capability. They train crews in rotation patterns to maintain continuous suppression. And most critically, they supply their guns with ammunition in quantities that make sustained fire doctrinally viable rather than wasteful. So we're better engineers but worse warriors? Yamamoto asked. We're brilliant engineers hamstrung by resource scarcity, Ito corrected. The Type 92 was designed for precision fire with limited ammunition, a doctrine born from Japan's industrial limitations, not tactical brilliance. The Americans designed their entire machine gun philosophy around the assumption of unlimited ammunition. In a war of abundance versus scarcity, abundance wins, regardless of mechanical superiority. Before Yamamoto could respond, a fresh burst of fire forced them all flat. This one was closer, deliberately targeting their specific position. Bullets cracked overhead, struck the foxhole's forward edge, sent debris raining down on them. The concentrated fire lasted perhaps 20 seconds, an eternity of violence that left Yamamoto's ears ringing and heart hammering, then shifted to another target with mechanical indifference. "They know we're here," Sato whimpered. "They're toying with us." "Demonstrating control," Ito corrected, crawling toward the next position. "Psychological warfare integrated with suppressive fire. They're showing us they can kill us whenever they choose, but prefer to break our spirits first." Yamamoto watched him go, then returned his attention to the hellscape the ridge had become. Japanese soldiers huddled in foxholes, unable to effectively man their weapons, reduced to passive observers of their own systematic destruction. The Type 92 crews sat uselessly beside guns they couldn't fire without drawing overwhelming response. Ammunition carefully hoarded, preserved through fire discipline that had become indistinguishable from paralysis. The sound of retching drew his attention. 20 meters down the line, a soldier had vomited from heat, exhaustion, and stress. Yamamoto watched the man try to crawl deeper into his foxhole, seeking protection that didn't exist. Another soldier, younger, had given up entirely, sitting upright despite the danger, staring at nothing with 1,000-yard eyes that had already checked out of reality. Yamamoto-san. Corporal Fujita appeared at the foxhole's edge, his ledger now so damaged it was barely recognizable. The supply NCO's hands shook uncontrollably as he tried to make notations. "I need to report the ammunition situation." A burst of fire interrupted him, forcing them all down. When it passed, Fujita continued with the mechanical persistence of a man clinging to procedure as a lifeline. "Even without firing, we're losing ammunition. American artillery destroyed 3 supply caches this morning. Estimated loss, 15,000 rounds. We're down to..." The second day's assault began with familiar artillery thunder, but Yamamoto barely flinched. Terror had given way to numb acceptance, the paralysis of men who'd already died mentally, awaiting only the physical conclusion. Machine gun crews sat beside their Type 92s like mourners at a funeral, forbidden to fire by Lieutenant Nakamura's desperate ammunition conservation orders. American infantry advanced methodically, 100 meters, 75 meters, 50 meters. Japanese soldiers held their fire, watching enemies close to ranges where missing was impossible, yet still Nakamura withheld permission. "Each bullet must count," he insisted, even as counting became meaningless against such abundance. At 30 meters, permission finally came. Sato gripped the Type 92's handles, squeezed the trigger, released a brief burst that struck down 2 American soldiers. For one glorious second, Japanese firepower spoke. Then 3 M1919s swiveled toward their position, and the world exploded. The concentrated fire was annihilating. Sandbags disintegrated, metal screamed, the gun itself shattered under impacts. Sato's body jerked once, twice, then collapsed across the destroyed weapon. Yamamoto watched, too stunned even to grieve, as his foxhole companion died, proving that ammunition conservation merely ensured soldiers died with full magazines, a bitter mathematics that rendered doctrine murderous. Sergeant Tanaka's voice cut through the chaos, countermanding officers. "Fire at will! Survive!" His open defiance represented complete hierarchical collapse, but Yamamoto had ceased caring about discipline. He fired his rifle desperately as Americans surged forward. The brief volley forcing momentary withdrawal, not victory, merely postponement of inevitable defeat. Captain Matsumoto's counterattack order reached them through a runner whose hands shook so violently he could barely salute. Yamamoto gathered his remaining squad, 7, men from an original 15, and prepared for what doctrine promised would restore Japanese superiority through warrior spirit and close combat shock. The banzai charge began with traditional shouts, bayonets fixed, soldiers running forward believing Seishin would overcome bullets. American M1919s opened fire at 200 meters, creating interlocking kill zones that transformed courage into suicide. Men fell in waves, sustained fire never pausing, never wavering, simply grinding down flesh with mechanical indifference. Yamamoto ran through a nightmare of falling comrades. The soldier beside him crumpled without sound. Another screamed briefly before machine gun fire cut him silent. He reached 50 meters before concentrated fire stitched across his squad, killing 3 instantly. He dove into a shell crater, landing among corpses. While bullets cracked overhead in continuous thunder, Lieutenant Nakamura died shouting about Bushido, his sword raised heroically and uselessly against industrial violence that cared nothing for tradition. Warrant Officer Ito fell attempting rifle suppression of American guns, technical knowledge proving insufficient against material superiority. Yamamoto watched 80 men reduced to 12 survivors in 90 seconds of mechanized slaughter. Crawling back to Japanese lines, he encountered Corporal Fujita's body in the ammunition bunker, a suicide note clutched in dead hands explaining defeat through mathematics too certain for courage to overcome. The note's final line haunted him: "Spirit cannot defeat accounting." The third day found Yamamoto commanding 7 survivors in a collapsed bunker: dying Sergeant Tanaka, 2 wounded soldiers, 1 catatonic private, and 3 barely functional fighters. American forces hadn't assaulted since the counterattack's failure. They didn't need to. Instead, loudspeakers broadcast surrender appeals in perfect Japanese, promising medical care, food, honorable treatment under Geneva Conventions. Between broadcasts, M1919s fired periodic bursts, not to kill, but to remind survivors of helplessness. The psychological warfare was devastatingly effective, more destructive than bullets. Tanaka died slowly, whispering final advice: "Save the men. Honor means nothing if no one survives to rebuild." His death severed Yamamoto's last connection to pre-battle certainty, leaving only pragmatic survival instinct and philosophical doubt. Medical corpsman Hashimoto's diary became their unintended testament. He pressed it into Yamamoto's hands, requesting preservation regardless of outcome, historical witness mattering more than individual survival. The request transformed the diary from medical record into moral document. Truth-telling elevated above propaganda. American leaflets dropped overhead showed maps of Allied victories across the Pacific. Strategic context revealing tactical defeat's larger meaning. 3 soldiers attempted surrender during darkness, successfully reaching American lines. Their safe passage proved enemy broadcasts truthful, complicating Yamamoto's understanding of honorable resistance. The remaining defenders debated impossible choices: death maintaining Bushido code or survival bearing permanent shame. Yamamoto realized both positions held validity, that systemically failed situations created only tragic options without clear moral superiority. Fourth Dawn brought American ultimatum via loudspeaker: surrender by noon or face final assault. Yamamoto gathered 7 survivors for decision, defining their remaining lives. Medical corpsman Hashimoto argued medical oaths superseded military orders, preserving life trumped dying for already lost causes. The philosophical debate revealed fractures between propaganda and personal conscience. One private insisted honor demanded death. Another countered that honor meant nothing if no one survived remembering. Yamamoto recognized truth in both arguments, the impossibility of right choices when institutions had squandered lives through faulty doctrine. He made the hardest decision, permitting individual choice rather than commanding uniform response. 4 soldiers chose surrender, seeking life over ideology. Yamamoto chose to remain, not from Bushido belief, but from personal definition of duty. Transcending doctrine's collapse, emotional. Farewells followed, men who'd shared foxholes and terror now, separating according to conscience rather than orders. Hashimoto entrusted Yamamoto with his diary regardless of final outcome, historical witness mattering beyond individual survival. Yamamoto composed letters to family, gave them to surrendering soldiers for potential delivery. As noon approached, 4 soldiers walked toward American lines carrying improvised white flags. Yamamoto watched them accepted safely. Americans demonstrating restraint that contradicted propaganda about barbaric enemies. He and 2 remaining companions checked weapons for final stand, uncertain whether they faced annihilation or further mercy, but committed to choices made through individual moral reasoning rather than institutional compulsion. Noon passed with Yamamoto and 2 soldiers still resisting. American response wasn't immediate assault, but final demonstration of industrial warfare's nature. 30 minutes of coordinated suppressive fire from 6 M1919s in perfect rotation, continuous thunder pulverizing their position without pause for ammunition concerns. The bunker walls collapsed progressively under sustained fire. 1 companion died crushed by falling concrete, another wounded critically. Yamamoto experienced the full psychological weight of fighting enemies with unlimited resources, where personal courage meant nothing against mechanical persistence that simply never stopped. Abruptly, firing ceased. An American officer approached under truce flag, speaking fluent Japanese, offering final surrender terms. He explained strategic situations honestly, Japan's inevitable defeat, the futility of continued resistance, the mercy offered from strength rather than weakness. Yamamoto, concussed and deafened, recognized the essential futility. Americans could erase his position whenever they chose. They offered mercy not from necessity, but from confidence, so complete they could afford generosity. In his last military decision, he chose survival, emerging with Hashimoto's diary and Fujita's suicide note, historical documents more valuable than pointless death. American medics treated wounded Japanese soldiers immediately, demonstrating professional care that contradicted propaganda completely. Reunited with surrendered comrades in POW processing, Yamamoto observed American abundance firsthand. Food exceeding weeks of Japanese rations, ammunition stacked casually, supply trucks arriving with more materiel, watching machine gun crews maintain weapons beside casually stacked ammunition boxes. Yamamoto understood viscerally why Japan had lost. Not through moral inferiority or tactical incompetence, but through industrial capacity's grinding mathematics, abundance systematically destroying scarcity, regardless of courage, spirit, or warrior tradition's tragic nobility against modernity's brutal calculus. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.